Recording in
tissue between chambers and pushed it through and go in to where it belongs. That is. The mechanic that I use, what do you do to so that the vision up?
You want it all? Just take a little stint with a Band-Aid or something, take a Band-Aid on it,
I was
and
wondering,
rip it off.
how do you sew that up? You shouldn't have a hole. We don't make that big a hole, so it heals itself. That's wonderful.
No, next week. Godspell at the university. Oh, like a Broadway company or touring company of some sort.
You weren't even born.
No, God, I know you're lying about that because Godspell was written well after our war. Jesus Christ Superstar. Today you can't see it. I can have to get a chair. It's coming through today.
They usually don't want to attend. I don't think you're letting them sit out there.
Well, I just go back with my reserved seats. Right, because the list. Yeah. You said you're gonna get out by that time, but you're leaving.
Not that they would come on You need to give us a piece of
Friend who lost their house last disease.
Try not to fall asleep. If you see me now, yeah, go ahead.
We start to learn about insurance.
Ah, no. Oh, you guys.
So what are you gonna wear? Ash colored clothes in case you get anything on it, it won't show. What airport are you?
We have diesel brakes that are
Right.
See if I can see everything. I'm on a little pillow so I can get up higher. Anyway, so I think we pretty much are, yeah, everybody else out there looks like they have coats on and are ready to go, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. And nobody's on Zoom, okay. So let me ask, who wasn't here last week? Okay, good. Well, I'm welcome. Glad you made it this time. It's great. Anything last week It's okay, you don't need to know it. And then thank the rest of you for coming back for the second time. It's awesome. So good to see everybody. So I guess I'll start out by, for those of you who weren't here last week, I basically just talked about Zen, kind of what Zen is, what the Zen experience is, of like, you know, talking about the pure oneness, pure being, pure awareness, which is kind of the description of a Zen experience, but it's not the experience itself. So, you know, that's all talking. Today's is going to be interacting and experiential. So adding a little bit more depth to that, hopefully. And what I'm going to be using is something, it's a teaching tool called the Big Mind Process. And it was a tool developed by my teacher, Zen Master Genpo Roshi. And it's kind of a blend of Western and Eastern type wisdom. And from the Western standpoint, it uses a technique called voice dialogue. And that's a technique that was developed by a couple of psychology PhDs named Hal and Sidra Stone. And my teacher met them back in the 1980s and was very interested in that technique and that process, and in fact studied with them on and off for the next 30 plus years. But he kept having this, the reason my teacher was so interested in it, he kept thinking there's got to be some way I can apply this to teaching Zen students. I mean, that was his main focus. Obviously, he's a Zen teacher. I want to teach Zen students. And finally, you know, so he met them in the 80s. In the 90s, he was actually finally able to kind of align this process with the Eastern spiritual tradition and came up with this Big Mind process. And so it was developed for the intention of teaching Zen students, but as it turns out, it ends up being a pretty it has wide applications. So my teacher does do workshops in just the Big Mind process. People come from all different disciplines because it's really applicable to so many different areas, different professions, different vocations. And so you don't have to be a Zen student to be interested in it. Now, a lot of his Zen students also take it to their vocation as well. So I know he's got at least 3, maybe as many as 5 business CEOs that I can think of right off the top of my head, and they use this technique for business leadership development, and it can be used. I've actually used it a little bit in medicine, but because of time constraints, I can't use it very much. I couldn't use it very much because they only give you this much time to see people. So, but I have used it some, and it's very, very applicable, of course, to, you know, therapists, psychotherapists, or psychiatrists, psychologists, any life coaching type of thing, even health coaching. And interestingly enough, my teacher has a couple of students who are athletic coaches. So once she's she was a professional, what do you call that? Extreme skier. And so she teaches these elite skiing classes, and she used the Big Mind process to help overcome kind of the mental obstructions to athletic performance. And he also has another student who's a kind of a coach to a professional soccer team in Mexico and does the same thing, uses it for the same reason. How can you inform or, how can you improve athletic performance by kind of getting at some of the obstacles? So anyway, so the reason that this technique is good for all those types of things is it allows us to really examine our behaviors and kind of look inside and explore our interiors and emotions and kind of get a handle on what's healthy and what's unhealthy and what's immature and what's mature, and things that are, say, unhealthy and immature, you know, being able to mature them and become integrated. And so that so that's one aspect. And then my teacher took it the next level of being able to explore and become acquainted with our non-everyday state of mind. So the way we usually look at things dualistically, this and that, you know, me, you, things are separated. That state of oneness or pure being, you can actually access that with this method and get a good glimpse of, you know, what's going on that way. And ideally, you want to integrate both, you know, our everyday perspectives and our beyond everyday perspective and become integrated. Doing that seems to foster appreciation, a lot of appreciation and gratitude for your life, and allows you to take responsibility for your life in a way that's not heavy or onerous or a chore, but rather doing it with confidence and joy even. And then as you go through your life with all aspects integrated, you any situations that come up in your life, you're no longer a slave to the knee-jerk reactions or the patterned behaviors that most of us grow up with and kind of fall back on, and we end up reacting all the time rather than responding. So this can give us the room for a response and have actually freedom to pick a response, to pick a response. And it always ends up being aligned with wisdom and compassion when you're truly integrated. So anyway, that's a lot of talk about, you know, what we're going to do, and may or may not mean much, but so we're going to explore this a little bit. And so the mechanics of it are, I'm the facilitator, and I'm going to be actually asking to speak to an aspect of the self. And so what does that mean? So this is myself, and I'm made up of all different kinds of, you know, traits, attributes, emotions. You know, you could pick anything, joy or anger or frustration or love, or, you know, you can actually ask to speak to one aspect at a time. So that's what I'm going to be doing, asking to speak to one aspect or voice. You can call it voice dialogue. That's where that comes from. One aspect or one voice. And the one, when I ask to speak to it, the self, we're setting the self aside. All the rest of the voices get to be over here. And I'm going to ask to speak to just one specific voice. And I'll give you an example. So probably I'll just do this one first, is if I ask to speak to the controller, I'll just say, please allow me to speak to the controller, and then I'll ask, who am I speaking to? And it helps to make actually a little physical shift, to make the mental shift to just that voice. But I'll say, who am I speaking to? And you all say, the controller, you know, the voice I asked to speak to. And then I'm going to just be exploring. I'll ask some questions. We'll see if we can get to know this aspect a little bit better. If you want to answer, you know, raise your hand, and I'll just call on you. I probably won't call on you if you don't raise your hand, but no guarantees. Probably not. Yeah, we'll just have some, you know, let's just have some fun with it. It's kind of an exploration. Let's see, what else should I say? If you're in voice, you know, as long as you're coming from the voice I asked to speak to, or the aspect I asked to speak to, everything you say is the right answer. You know, the only thing that I'm going to be on the alert for is the self always kind of wants to jump back in and take it over, take over the show. And if I notice that it's actually the self speaking and not the voice I asked to talk to, I'll try and get you back into the voice. So anything else, Dan?
That's perfect.
That good enough? Okay. So, I mean, the best thing is to just do it. Everything I just already said didn't have to happen, or I didn't have to say any of it. But I know you guys haven't ever heard of this probably ever before, or most of you. So, so it's good to know a little something. But okay, so let's start with the voice of the controller. So if you'd allow me, I'd like to speak to the voice of the controller. I'll just have you do a little shift. Okay, so who am I speaking to? See, doesn't get harder than that. It's very easy, very easy. So, okay, so you're the controller. Well, let's start with what's your job?
To control.
Yeah, again, not rocket science, to control. So, okay, very good. And I think it's important maybe to start off right at first too, to say who you're not. Who are you not? You are the controller, who are you not? Just to get clear.
I'm not the free spirit creative part.
Okay, that's, yep,
Not the subservient.
right? And as a conglomerate, you're not the self. So we're just gonna say you're not the self. But yes, you're very right. You're not those other aspects. So the self's here, we're just the controller. So as the controller, your job is to control what or who do you like to control or want to control? Who or what? Anybody? Yeah.
Emotions.
Okay, the self's emotions, right? You want to control the self's emotions, and you had something.
Overall self-being.
Okay, so like the well-being of the
Mhm.
self?
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, very important. Okay, what else? Yeah,
Nobody but myself.
okay, so as the controller, you don't want to control anybody else, just yourself. Okay, that's healthy, that's mature. Okay, anybody else? Yeah,
Well, I'd like to control.
yeah, I'm asking just what would you like to do?
Yeah, I'd like to control the weather. I'd like to
Yeah.
control.
I was thinking about that. That's what was coming up for me. How about the climate change,
Yeah, yeah.
world peace? I mean, everything I mean, seriously, I mean, wouldn't you just admit you would like to control everything? But maybe that's not your job. Who do you work for? The self. Yeah, exactly. So, we mentioned a couple of things. I think there's a lot more. So I heard emotions. You help control the self's emotions. And what else? What other aspects of the self or the self's life or the self's interests do you control?
The self's path.
Okay, very good. The self's life path. Excellent. Anything else?
Control how you react to your environment.
Okay, excellent. Control how the self reacts to his environment. Yeah,
Controlling time would be a good thing.
it would be. Can you do that? But what can you, what aspect of the self can you lend your expertise in that department? Can you control if he gets somewhere on time or his relationship to time? Hopefully. Yeah. Well, that's a good point. Hopefully, like, let me just ask, does the self love and appreciate you?
Sometimes.
Sometimes, okay. That's what I thought, sometimes. Okay, when does the self, what doesn't the self appreciate about you? Let me put it that way. Yeah,
When I'm excessive.
okay. When you're excessive, exactly. And anything you want to say about when does that happen?
Just over control.
Over control, okay. Okay, perfect, yes.
Obsessive.
Obsessive, can you say more?
Obsessing on silly little things that really you have no control.
Okay, so this is really good. So what's coming out is when you're not completely owned and appreciated by the self, what ways do you sneak out or leak out? So one, Linda said over control or being obsessive. How else do you sneak out or appear? I mean, because you don't go away, right? If the self's trying to shove you down in the basement, it's not like you disappear. You're going to come out, but you're going to come out covertly or in a sneaky way. And how does that look? You guys said already a couple of great ones. Mark?
I sneak out when I read the paper and try to control things that I read about.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
Controlling how valuable you perceive yourself.
Okay. Okay.
Am I living up to the Zen teachings?
Okay. So you're concerned about that.
If I'm,
If
if
you're-
I'm concerned about changing things,
Yeah.
controlling things, I
Right.
am concerned of that, yes.
Right. Right. Okay. Any other ways you
By
can?
judgment of self and others.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. How about controlling others? Anybody ever try and control anybody besides their own self? And that's come up for me, just saying. Like, your adult children. Anyway, so what if the self loved and appreciated you and let you do your job unencumbered? They're not trying to shove you in the basement, giving you a seat at the table, up in the main part of the house, like all the other voices, even the pretty ones, love and beauty and whatever. And if you were actually loved and respected by the self, how would that look differently in the self's life? How would that show up? How would you show up?
Peace.
Peace, more peace,
More cooperation,
cooperation, absolutely.
more openness. to
Openness.
Different people, different concepts.
Beautiful.
As you said earlier, more response than reaction.
More responsiveness. Yeah, beautiful. Yes.
Right, love too. Love
Love,
and acceptance,
love and acceptance,
openness.
Joy.
joy. So you, as a controller, you're allowing room for these other aspects to enrich the self's life, it sounds like. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, as a fully free functioning controller, I could control what needs to be controlled, and it doesn't become just control for itself. It's control that is in service to something bigger,
Absolutely,
something bigger.
absolutely. You know what your job is and what you can control
And who I work for.
and who you work for. Nice.
I know what my job is, and I'm empowered to do it.
Very good. Well, go ahead.
Where do you get that direction of knowing what you can control?
So there's another thing about the process. I didn't know if it would come up. Usually no crosstalk. You can direct all the questions up to me rather than trying to figure out what somebody
We'll
else.
talk later.
But the other thing is, I meant to say this and I forgot. If something comes up and it doesn't necessarily resonate with your experience, that's okay. Probably will more often than not, but it doesn't always. Don't worry about it. As long as you're in the voice, you don't have to understand somebody else's response. They're in their voice, you're in yours. So, yeah.
I can hear him.
Yeah, I can hear him.
And I then direct to you, what do I do to follow up on my questions of what I am control over?
Well, let me ask you, so who am I speaking to?
I am a controller
The controller, right,
of myself.
of the self. Yes.
And I'm wondering if I have enough control of other things around me. And he.
Don't worry about him, just that you come from your own
I'm
wisdom.
wondering,
Come from
how
your own
do,
wisdom.
how do other people that are Zen students finding out what their controlled environment is?
Well, you're the controller, so I would ask you that question. So it sounds a little bit like the self is coming in wanting to ask a question. So I'm gonna, again, kind of see, as the controller, let me say you're now the owned, embodied, and empowered controller. You're owned, embodied, and empowered. The self loves and appreciates you and will allow you to do your job to the fullest extent. And I want everybody to go there. That's where I was going to go next anyway. I want to speak to the fully owned, embodied, and empowered controller. So you are embodied and empowered controller. So you're empowered to do your job. So do you have anything to say to the self's question?
Am I a monk?
You're the controller. But I didn't ask to speak to the monk. I asked to speak to the controller.
Okay, if I'm asking you as controller of our discussion, you mentioned last time that it doesn't take any more than acknowledging that you're a monk to be a monk.
I don't think I exactly said that. It takes a little bit more to be a monk. Maybe, I'm not really sure, but let's just stick right now with just the controller. And maybe we'll move on and some of this might clear up by some of the other things I'm going to ask to speak to. Why don't we just see if it does?
Sure.
And, you know, if the self wants to talk to me afterwards, that's okay too. But right now, I just want to stay in the voice that I've asked to speak to. So not the monk, not the questioner, the controller of the self, just the controller of the self. So you guys are the fully owned, embodied, and empowered controller. How does that manifest in one's life? How can that change one's life for the better? Can we put it that way?
More clarity.
Clarity. Very good.
Have the ability to say no.
That's great. That's a good one, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Very good. Anything else anybody wants to say?
Confidence.
Confidence. Wonderful. Well, if there's nothing else, we can move on. This is like a little sampler too. I'll just say, I could have said this at the beginning. When I did big mind workshops in the past, they'd usually be about like 3 hours, you know, to really get into some of these. So this is fast and, you know, but it'll give you, I think, a good taste. So the next voice I'd like to speak to is one that I think is important because it's kind of almost universally disowned. I'd like to speak to the voice of anger. So who am I speaking to?
Anger.
Okay. And what's your job?
Be angry.
Be angry. Okay. And who do you work for?
The self.
The self. The self. Okay. And how does the self feel about you?
Not very proud sometimes.
Not very proud. Okay.
Cautious.
I thought so. Embarrassed. Cautious?
There's different kinds of anger.
Okay, say more.
And
Your anger, and sometimes you come out
it can be,
differently.
Of a moment, just angry for whatever reason, not really understanding.
So you
it.
can be
Or you
angry
have
on-
clear
Yeah.
anger with something.
You're kind of talking
Which
the
is-
spectrum. That's nice. Yeah. So a spontaneous outburst versus something that's more well thought out. Yeah.
So it's
Very good.
Bubbling inside.
Pardon?
Bubbling inside.
Bubbling inside, right. So the self like to take you out and parade you around or proud of you or maybe not so much. I'm hearing not so much.
Justified or unjustified.
Yeah, yeah. How about in society? How are you depicted in society? What does the general culture think about you?
Seems like the culture is starting to embrace it.
Yeah.
Much more so than when I was
When you were
growing up and
okay.
younger.
Yeah.
Younger adult even.
Yeah, sometimes the way we're perceived can be generational or, you know, cultural even, right?
As a woman's anger, you should be suppressed.
Okay, okay, yeah, yeah. So what I'm hearing is a lot of, like I kind of alluded to, disowned anger. So when the self doesn't love and appreciate you, isn't ready to acknowledge that you have a wisdom or a function, you really get put down in the basement. You're one of those voices that gets put way down, locked up, no TV, no access to the kitchen, no nothing. And then what happens? You're down there, you disappear, then what happens?
Breakout.
You break out. You break out. And what's that look like? I think we all were just talking about it.
Abrasive, aggressive.
Abrasive, aggressive,
Loud.
loud.
I attack the digestive system.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Yes, absolutely. So how do you manifest in the body? That's one way. How else?
Heartburn.
Heartburn. Yeah,
Depression.
depression. Absolutely.
Sleeplessness.
I'm sorry?
Sleeplessness.
Sleeplessness. Yeah, you'll keep them awake, won't you? You're pretty darn good at that. Well, as a cardiologist, I get a lot of business because of you. So the longer you're suppressed and the more time goes by, you start out maybe as something in the body, a heartburn or insomnia, and then it actually eventually results in something substantial. Physical, yeah, it can. So anyway, you're very powerful. So what does that mean about you? That's a lot of what?
Energy.
Energy.
And sometimes I make the self feel good because it's performative, and culturally performative anger
Mhm.
resonates very well
Okay.
right now. But afterwards, the self doesn't feel good about
Doesn't
it.
feel good. Okay. Right. Okay, so energy, I love, that energy is huge. I mean, there may not be any other voices that have more energy than you.
Don't you start to learn anger from actually the time that you perceive other people? I mean, as an infant or a child.
It goes way back, doesn't it?
It goes way back.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to discard
Right,
the uglier parts of anger,
right.
where there are times when anger is definitely justified.
So what would happen if the self did love and appreciate you and asked you what you had to offer? What do you have to offer the self? Let me just ask you that. What do you have to offer? The self doesn't see it. Self just thinks you're kind of ugly and not fit for society, polite society and all that, so keeps you down. But what would you have to offer?
I offer the self release of feelings.
Okay, release of feelings,
Action.
action. You're the petrol. You are the petrol for the self. This is energy. This is energy. And when the self keeps you locked down there, it gets all knotted and bottled up and comes out in all the ways we talked about. So what you offer the self, petrol, energy, action, release even. So how would that look differently in the self's life if he or she loved and appreciated you and listened to what you were actually saying, rather than assigning you some thing that they saw out in we model the disowned anger that we see out there. But as anger, if I'm true to my own wisdom, how would I come out?
I do want to collaborate with the controller.
They're good? Yeah, that wouldn't be a bad idea. You might want to collaborate with the controller.
Yeah.
So you maybe collaborate with other aspects of the self.
More discernment in how I react,
Absolutely,
thoughtful responses
right.
that are true to the self rather than,
And maybe appropriate for the time and the place and the amount.
Sometimes as anger, I can represent parts of me that I don't normally use in public. And so I can give voice to some fundamental things that my thinking mind might not want to, my
Okay.
logical mind. might
Right,
not
right,
use.
okay. Very good.
As a controller of yourself, don't you ask your question of what do I need to do to go into meditation to address this anger?
So can I speak to anger?
If I'm
Yeah, are you,
controller of myself, I want to know what do I talk to myself about in controlling my anger?
well, I think we're gonna try and get to that, but first I would like to speak to anger. So you are
I'm
anger.
angry at my government.
Okay, okay,
And
great.
I say,
Yeah, yeah.
boy, I'm really angry
Yeah,
today.
good. Absolutely, right. So if the self loved and appreciated you, there's some wisdom in what you're saying, right? So if the self loved and appreciate you, do you go spewing out or are you able to fashion a response rather than a reaction?
Yes, I can think of a
You
response.
can think of a response, yeah.
And I need to think in a meditation mode because my anger is really talking to me.
Okay,
And I'm not able to control what I'm hearing
okay,
of my environment. So if I sit in meditation, I'm going to talk to myself about control, 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 and then these parts don't matter. These parts do.
so what happens
And
if,
sorting out what I should be angry at.
as anger, what happens if the controller is getting a little bit too overbearing with you?
How do you separate?
Because that's what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing. Everybody's over there. I'm speaking just to anger. So what, as anger, if the self's trying to manipulate you, how do you feel?
Anxious.
Angry?
Anxious about
Yeah.
not having the
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah, yeah. So let's try this. Let's see what happens if we really appreciate anger, you as anger. Own, embody, and empower you to be able to speak your wisdom and benefit the self by your wisdom. So I would like to speak to fully owned, fully embodied, fully empowered anger. So you are
Fully owned, fully embodied, and fully empowered anger.
okay, so how does this look different than when you weren't appreciated or listened to?
Well, sometimes I appreciate anger because sometimes it's the stimulus.
I appreciate myself.
myself because it gives me the stimulus to do something about it in a positive manner.
Very good. So you're not spewing out like this. It's like you're become aware of what your options are
But
for
I'm-
action.
And I am stimulated to do it.
What your options are for action.
Yeah.
That's, yeah, beautiful. Mark, did you?
I was just going to say that I can manifest more genuinely when I'm fully empowered.
Absolutely. Of course, of course. Yeah.
When I'm fully empowered, I become responsible for what I do.
Okay.
I'm responsible for my actions as anger, and I know the power of myself, that I can burn everything down, and I know that I'm responsible for that.
Right. And
And if
so,
everything needs to be burned down, I'm fully empowered. I can do it.
and are you aligned with wisdom and compassion as you're fully owned, embodied, and empowered? So you come out appropriate to the what time, and appropriate for the time, the place, and in the right amount. aligned with wisdom and compassion,
I know what my job is.
right?
I can be responsive and not reactive.
Very good, for sure. All right, well, I think, I'm just watching the clock a little, we'll move on, just so we can get to a few more things. The next one, all right. I would like to speak to the precious human body. So who am I speaking to?
The precious human body.
Okay, so look and see, what are you about? What are some of your attributes, characteristics? What can you tell me about yourself?
My warranty is run out.
Run out? I see you. You're running out, okay, maybe all our warranties are running out eventually. Okay, I like that, yeah,
I'm amazing.
you are. Any other, what do you do for the self? Are you important to the self? Yeah. I mean, where would the self be without you? Right?
6 feet down.
6 feet down, right. So you're very important. I mean, the self wouldn't even be here without you. So do you receive the full amount of appreciation and love that you feel you deserve? Does the self always appreciate you?
No.
No. I mean, sometimes the self even talks bad about you, right? Me and joints. So how does that make you feel when the self is kind of berating you for carrying him or her around all these years, you know?
Pride in your accomplishment.
Yeah. So it's a kind of a mature body speaking pride. Pride in your accomplishment, shouldn't you be, right? Because he wouldn't be here without you. You should be very proud.
Yep.
Very proud.
I don't like when the controller says I should always be going to the Y.
Okay. So yeah, well, that's a good point. So what would you say to the self? What are some of the things that the self could do better regarding you from your perspective? What could the self do better? Maybe not go to the Y as much. Maybe it's too much. I can be over exercised.
Be accepting.
Pardon?
Be accepting.
Accepting.
Let me sleep.
Okay. Could let you sleep.
Exercise in nature.
Nature. Okay, so you appreciate nature as the body.
Yes.
Okay.
Help me do the best that I'm capable of.
So you would like the self to help you do the best you're capable of. And how are some of the ways she could do that? How about diet, exercise, environment? Are things like that important to how you're functioning? I mean, some of it was already brought up, but like
Motivation.
motivation, the self being helping you motivate, be motivating, okay.
Like she said today, take a Sabbath.
Take a Sabbath, yeah, exactly, give me a day of rest already, you know, exactly. Yeah,
Understand the reason I'm precious is I'm only here for a little while.
very good.
I'm not going to be here forever. And when it's time to go, let me go.
Mhm. So, yeah, that is one thing you just said it very clearly here. As the human body, you have a beginning and an end, right? And how does the self feel about that? Especially the end part. And how does society feel about that? I mean, how does that look in our culture? The fact that as a human body, I'm going to die.
I'm not speaking as self, but just in general, society drums everything into you that you gotta do this and this and this so you can look younger and da, 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 and just
Yes.
put off the inevitable. I mean, hello. Do
Exactly.
you know anybody that, well, what was the oldest, 116? She just died a couple weeks ago. I mean, come on.
Isn't there just like vast businesses developed and people
My
making
anger came up in that one.
money on this fear? Aren't you, you know, it's like we've been taught to fear our own mortality. It's not acceptable, or at least it's not acceptable. If we don't fear it, it's not the polite thing to do. You need to look younger, be younger, do this or that.
It's pride in how you cope with your life.
Very good. You have pride in how you cope with your life as a mature perspective from the body. Yeah, so why else are you called precious? Precious human body. Why else are you precious?
Well, there's no way to replace it.
Unique. You're absolutely 100% unique, right? Absolutely. And like Dan alluded to, the fact that you have an expiration date, kind of, if you can really, if the self would really take that in, how would that affect his or her life? If the self could really take that in. You're precious, you're limited.
More compassion and acceptance.
Compassion and acceptance. Very good. Yeah.
Motivation.
Motivation. Okay. Yeah, time is short. Time passes swiftly by and opportunity is lost. Yeah.
From a Christian perspective, as the precious human body, I know that I am the hands of Christ in the world.
Beautiful.
I'm precious because I am the vehicle for God's love in this world.
That's beautiful. Very nice. So, I think I'm hearing a lot of mature perspectives here, but let's just fully own, embody, and empower you to be the precious human body. So, let me speak to the fully owned, embodied, and empowered precious human body. You are good, beautiful. So, I didn't tell you this, but I'm going to build a triangle. So over here, we have our voices, and you know, just a little sampling of some of the aspects of self that we went over, the body, anger, the controller. This is kind of a lot of our human aspects. So I want to go to the opposite corner of the triangle. I want to go to the opposite. So this is the human. I want to speak to pure being. So who am I speaking to? Okay, so let's just sit with that. This may be new. It may be not so experienced. You're not the human. You're pure being. The other word for you is big mind. That's why this is called big mind process. So big mind. So I want you to look in as pure being or big mind. Do you find any boundaries or borders, any edges, any beginning, any end? Just look in, pure being. Take a moment. What's it like as pure being?
Evaluation of what your virtues are so you can relay them to others.
That sounds like something the self is very, very appropriately into, but you as pure being,
How do people determine the pure being?
I'm
Of
just asking
themselves.
to speak to it. We don't determine it. We're gonna be it. So if you'd allow me to speak to not the questioner, but just pure being, just be there, pure being. Pure being, no questioning, pure being. So as pure being, what happens with questions? Is anybody experiencing that? Are there questions?
Dissolve.
There's no questions in this space. So I'm going to ask the questioner to kind of go over here, can observe, but just go over here. And I'd like to speak to pure being. Pure being. How does that feel? What's that like?
There's spaciousness.
Spaciousness, isn't there?
Oneness.
Oneness,
Connection.
interconnected, oneness. Absolutely.
Eternal.
Eternal. Very good. Yeah, do you find a beginning or an end? Edges, boundaries.
Like coming home.
Coming home, that's absolutely. This is home. This is home.
Example.
Example. For the self. The self could look at you.
For yourself so that you can progress
So let me,
as a pure being.
as pure being, pure beingness, how can you benefit the self? If the self lets you be present more often in his or her life, how could you be of benefit if the self would can reside here more?
Internal peace.
Peace. So the self could have more peace in her life.
Or more love of self and others.
Okay, more love of self and others. You provide this spaciousness. Without what? Any attachments here? Any
No
judgments? No conflict?
No fear.
No fear.
I provide a neutral space
You're a neutral
for
space.
everybody else.
You're a neutral space. So how could you, else could you help the self in his or her life?
I could give the self a continually give the self a new place to start from.
Oh, beautiful. Everything arises. Is there anything that you exclude? Is there anything missing?
I can provide horizons in any direction that any other part of self looks. There are horizons.
That's beautiful. Beautifully said, yeah. Anybody else feel like speaking
Awareness.
awareness, like pure awareness?
Vast acceptance.
Vast acceptance.
No need for hatred.
No need for hatred. Is there any hatred? The other thing I could say about this space, it's not a chatty space. Do you find a lot of need to talk even? But you can talk. I'm talking to you. So not excluded, but you know. So it's natural to be and maybe not be so vocal or explanatory. There's nothing to explain.
There's no place that the self can find himself where I won't be.
Very good. Well, I think if you'll allow me, so we've got the human part over here, our being part over here. I'm going to go to the apex of the triangle now. the perspective that includes and goes beyond both. You're fully 100% human, 100% being, and I'm going to give you a name. I'm going to call you the free-functioning human being. So please allow me to speak to the free-functioning human being. So you are? Okay. Let's just take that in and see what this is like. You have every capacity to act with all your humanity and every capacity of full beingness at your disposal, 100% each all the time. So what's this like?
Lightness.
Lightness,
Calm.
calm,
Control.
silence, control. Control. Yeah, harmony. Yeah,
Non-judgmental.
judgmental. So how can the self proceed in life from this perspective? I could have added the word integrated, free-functioning human being, but that seems like a lot. So, free-functioning human being. Well, what I talked about a little bit at the start, would it make a difference in response versus reaction to situations that come up? So you have all your human attributes and all your being attributes, the drawing 100% all the time. Another name for you is true self. The little self over here we usually call the small self. Big self, true self. Complete integration. Anything you want to say as this, from this perspective?
Full understanding of yourself.
Nice. Full understanding. Very good.
All the tools I need are around me and available.
Beautiful. Excuse me, beautiful. Yeah. All the tools are around you. And how are they used from this perspective?
Sometimes well and sometimes poorly.
Mm-hmm. And how do you, from this perspective, how would you further characterize what the small self might call something going poorly? Would you look at that differently from this perspective?
What goes poorly is a step on a journey towards something else.
Beautiful. What goes poorly is a step on the journey towards something else. Very good. Yeah.
Being able to hold the pure being in yourself gives you a different way to perceive and respond.
Right. You have all the space to have all the response, all the possibilities are at your fingertips.
No regret.
No regret. So what else could I call you? Like if I wanted to write a letter or something to you, what could I call you?
Mr. Nelson.
Very good. Mr. Nelson. Bingo. Mr. Nelson, Mr. Crump. Mr. Borkhardt. Or maybe Mark or Dan. Mark. All right. I think maybe, we've got 10 minutes. We can stop, I think, at this point. Sometimes people ask about using the process, like you can use it during meditation. So, for instance, pure being or big mind, you can actually facilitate yourself. That's another way to meditate, because that is meditation, right? Pure being is meditation. So you could sit and say, please allow me to speak to pure being. And you're kind of facilitating yourself. Who am I speaking to? Pure being. Okay. What's this like? And then sit as that. It takes some practice. Or big mind, we use big mind in Zen. Allow me to speak to big mind. And you can ask yourself some leading questions too, if you want to, like, do you have any boundaries? Do you have any borders? Do I have any limitations? Is there a beginning or an end? Is there up or down, backwards, forwards? Pure being. And then just sit. And that's more, as opposed to what I taught last week, which was basic, very basic meditation. This would be more what in Zen you might call shikantaza, or just sitting, not just being, without an aim or a goal, just being.
I found when I started meditation and tried to reach this pure being, we would sit and the body just fought it. I mean, you were moving around, you were sneezing, you were coughing, you were thinking, it does take time.
Well, one thing that does help, I mean, were you here last week?
Yes.
Okay, so doing doing the comfortable position. So, sometimes those of you who may have been, visited a Zen center or meditation center where you're cross-legged and, they get little postures. And I mean, you can get really uncomfortable doing that. So there's no reason really you have to do that. You can just sit in a comfortable chair, light support on your back, put your hands on the top of your legs, and then just, like last week we talked about counting the breath. So you're not, get in a place where you're really, really, okay. And then and then just be still. And then either count your breath, or if you wanted to try doing this today, I know you guys were just introduced to this, so it might be a little tricky, but you could ask to speak to pure being. And how big am I? Do I have any boundaries? Do I have any limitations? Do I have a beginning and end? And then just sit. And that's a way to potentially do meditation. I didn't go through it that much to have you necessarily be able to do that, but if you want to try it, it might work for you. And yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that the image I keep coming back to in terms of the fully functioning is, because I'm sort of Pisces, so I'm thinking water, and you're on a giant lake, there's horizon wherever you go, and the different parts of self that are in the boat could be filling the hole in the boat, they can be rocking the boat, they can be propelling the boat, they can make it faster, slower, but it always is going to be someplace there, and endless possibilities.
Right. Beautiful. Yeah, I like that. Very nice. So anyway, last time I talked about, I might start some meditation. Maybe I'll start out maybe a couple times a month, and one of the mornings I'll figure out when. But I got some people's email if they wanted to be notified about that. If there's anybody else who didn't give it to me that wants to be notified. Otherwise, I'll probably, if they'll let me, I'll put it in the church bulletin too, because it'll be here. I'll probably do it down in the youth room. Is that what they call it? The one with our old furniture.
One with the comfy chair.
It's got our old living room furniture in there, so I feel very comfortable in there. So, yeah. So, yeah. Anything else anybody wants to say or do? I think we're just about out of time. But yeah, my pleasure. Good job, everybody. Very good job. Excellent. All right.
Fantastic.
Lunchtime.
Oh. I'll just call that. Yeah.
Oh, pardon me.
I'll just rip that out.
Let you out first.
Sounds good.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, no, my pleasure. Well, everybody is around. Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, this is amazing. This is amazing. Some places I wouldn't. Well, you know, it's also, it's for
Basically,
people.
line
You know,
line up on the
one thing
Zoom
is,
thing, so that's good.
then you don't go out trying to get people to.
That's the woman's witness.
Yeah, we don't, we're not like
And knocking on doors.
proselytizing, yeah, exactly. Oh, let me big mind you today.
Well, thanks a lot, Ken.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, my pleasure. There you go. And maybe.
Good.
Oh, yeah.
Slowly making my way.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Thank you so very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Yeah, thanks, Bart.
Thank you so much. This is
Oh.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Put Kamie in here.
Yeah, give me my email address. That's funny.
Boo.
Whoa. Okay.